What if I told you that men were 3.5 times more likely to be perfectly tolerant of opposing views compared to women?
We need to address as a country the issues that women actually prioritize.
He sold this narrative that we're going to have the best education in the world, and we're going to be the safest country in the world, and we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to get rid of this. And you sort of created this like utopian life and country that women want and desire.
Her children are facing the highest rates of unemployment in the history of Canada, and the Liberal Party has abandoned our children. These facts are not heard in our media these days because, well, when people hear them,
it would be virtually impossible for the woman to go back to that traditional life and, be a stay-at-home mom and take care and be that nurturing caregiver that the whole family needs. Just economically speaking, it's tough.
To me, it seems pretty clear that we've been told for the last 10 years something about radicalization, and it's been nothing but the opposite and an absolute lie. Welcome to the Right Call Podcast, everyone, episode 111. And today is a special one because we got a guest in the house. But first and foremost, my name is Elliot Daniel, and I'm joined today by our co-host,
Simmer Malhotra,
and that special guest,
Alexandra Hiscox.
How you doing, ma'am?
I'm fantastic, sir.
There you go. So we thought we'd do something a little different because today we're going to be diving into the differences between men and women and how it ties into politics. So it's going to be a deep dive. We're going to get a female's opinion, and she's an incredibly clever girl who is quite well-versed politically as well.
I'd say so.
You've been to Ottawa.
No expert, but I've been to Ottawa. I lived in Ottawa.
You've lived in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And you've been to Parliament.
I've been to Parliament.
And you know
I've
some
got it behind the scenes.
And you know some politicians?
Yes.
There you go. Don't forget to speak a little bit closer to the mic if possible. But guys, on the way to the studio today, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Almost $1.80. Almost $1.80 a liter for gasoline.
Crazy.
I think it's time for me. Well, I did something I haven't done like ever. You know that little select drive mode that Benz have? It's normally by default on comfort, right? You would know, you drive a Benz.
Yeah. The eco mode.
I put it on eco mode. I put it on the green eco mode. I'm now officially a closeted Prius driver because at that price, another thing I'm going to start doing, and you're going to shoot me for this, but fuck it. I'm putting regular gas in my car. No more 91 Supreme. I'm putting 87 octane. I can't afford it. This is insane. It's wild.
I hear you.
Dude.
I mean, and when fuel prices go up, the cost of everything goes up, right? Like inflation, that's how it works. When the cost of a core commodity of transportation, which is important in essentially every business, every consumer, you go to a store, well, that inventory had to be trucked in there, right? You buy your food at the grocery store, inventory had to be trucked in there. And so essentially when the cost of fuel goes up, especially that drastically, we went from, in Canada, we went from around $1.40 to right up to $1.70, $1.80. And I cross the border quite frequently for work. Yeah. And I go down to New York State. And in New York State, I saw the prices go from about $3.10 a gallon to about $3.50 a gallon. That's over a 10% increase in pretty much a couple of days. And so that is going to show up in other prices. And I think...
Absolutely. And what's crazy is I'm looking at the Americans. The Americans are complaining. They're like, oh my God, gas is like $3.30 a gallon. And I'm like, guys, it's
Look
still,
at us.
Yeah, it's still under $1 a liter for you guys, Yeah. It's wild. They don't know how good they have it.
It's about $1.18 a liter Canadian.
But the thing is, don't forget, also you have right now, obviously the government is saying it's Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault. It's the war. It's Iran. It's this, that. Okay, but how about we just talk about the fact that the industrial carbon tax right now just recently added an extra 7 cents per liter. We don't talk about that.
No.
So how about, right now the government realizes, okay, people are squeezed. They can't afford it. The cost of living crisis is through the roof. Screw the carbon tax, man. We're not saving the world with this shit. Give people a break. Yeah. And especially our Quebec leaders, because we're the only province still with a carbon tax directly tied into our gas price.
Yes. Yeah. I was just about to say, I'm in Rigaud half the week. It's almost worth it to drive to the border of Ontario and go fill up there.
Yeah. Well, for the people who don't know, Rigaud is about like half an hour away from Montreal, where we're located, right? Yeah. And the border would be about an hour away?
No, less. Rigaud is very close to the border.
Just admit that you're a speedster. You like to speed.
No, I'm a rule follower. Rule follower, all the way.
There you go. Okay. So, we're going to talk about 3 things. Again, men versus women, the war of the sexes, if you wish. The difference between men and women when it comes to tolerance of dissenting or opposite political beliefs. Then after that, the massive divide that is happening in terms of ideology and voting patterns between men and women, and why that might be, because it wasn't always like this whatsoever. And we're going to tie it all into how does this apply to right here, right now in Canada, and maybe we can try to get a few more women in the Conservative Party. And we're definitely going to pick your brain at that, because I think you'd
Go
be an
for
expert.
it.
Yeah? Perfect. So let's get into this one. What if I told you that men were 3.5 times more likely to be perfectly tolerant of opposing views compared to women? Well, for example, let's suppose you're a democratic socialist who has been invited to speak at a college campus. What do you think, or who do you think, would be more likely to silence you? Would it be a left-leaning woman or a right-wing man? Ta ta ta. Well, it may be reasonable to assume that someone with similar ideology would be more tolerant of your views, but new data suggests that it's not the case. Amazingly, it turns out that men are often more tolerant of the opposite side than women are of their own side. And for that, there's a graph we're going to bring on TV right now. So this graph shows where men and women are located on the free speech map. It's separated by political ideologies and obviously gender. And if you highlight all the men and all the women, they cluster in two very distinct groups. The women cohort that is highlighted, the first thing I notice is just how much lower women rank in terms of overall tolerance towards any views, really. This is not just political ideologies. Any views are about up to 20% less tolerant, which is crazy to think, right? Every day we think, okay, women are the people normally that are more accepting in society, day to day, right? Caring, inclusive. Yeah, no, it's at least not on this study, right?
And the whole liberal ethos is built on tolerance, open-mindedness, and the acceptance of other viewpoints. And so,
But then let's dive a little bit more granular into this, okay? If you look at women and men that rank on the slightly conservative spectrum, women tolerance of conservatives rank at 37%, whereas men tolerance of liberals rank at 44%. So indeed, men are a good chunk here. We're almost 10% more tolerant of the other side than women are of their own people. And this is not just for the Republican and conservative side of things, right? If you look at the Democratic Socialists, women tolerance on the left is 40% of other leftists, whereas Socialist Democrats in terms of tolerance for the right is roughly the same at 40% as well. They're equally as tolerant from one side to the other. So, I mean, guys, is this something you've experienced in your day-to-day life?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And it makes me laugh because especially it brings me back to my university days a little bit, where I would go on my Instagram, and I still see it a little bit on LinkedIn and Instagram today as well. But I would go on my Instagram, and it was during like the Black Lives Matter movements, the Me Too movements, and things going on today, current events, Israel, all these different things. And I see rants on people's stories about, if you don't agree with this, I'm blocking you. If you don't agree with this, don't bother talking to me. I want nothing to do with you. Don't bother questioning me on this. I don't have time for it. And those posts always come from women. I think very rarely, if not ever, have I seen those types of posts from men.
From men, eh? And something, I guess, me too. Like, you go on X and you see it all the time. The people that block other people tend to be women. I've seen on Instagram and Facebook, like you said. It's quite weird. What's this like desire to just live in an echo chamber all the time?
I personally believe that politics is no longer questions. We're no longer discussing just policies. We're talking about morals. We're talking about good versus evil. And it's really hard for people, and especially women, who tend to get a little bit more triggered by these things, because we like to help vulnerable people. When we're talking about good versus evil, there's no room for compromise. And so right away, you're going to see women retreat and not want to go into a discussion.
Right. Because another thing too that for me stands out with the graph is, you know, and I don't want to bring it to left versus right, but it does seem also that there is a divide in tolerance between the left and the right. Not an extremely wide divide, but it seems that people on the right tend to be slightly more tolerant of the left than the left is of the right. And this is across genders, by the way. So it's men and women alike. But like, just to reiterate, right? Men are 3.5 times more likely than women to be perfectly tolerant of opposing views, meaning they would actually allow someone from the other side to come on campus, because this was a study made on university students. And it gave me right away flashbacks of Charlie Kirk.
I was just about to say that.
You know, how he would go on campus and a lot of the crazy videos of people losing their shit was always women. The ones screaming that you're a fascist, you're a this, you're a that, we don't want you here, was always coming from the other side. Some men would actually entertain debate with Charlie. They would try to push their views. And if they were losing, then you would see them kind of like try to give a little like, F you, I don't like you, or you're this, you're that. But they would still try to engage. But it was always the women that would disturb everything. I don't know, man. Like, do you think, like, if we went to a campus and tried to communicate with people, do you think this is what we would see?
Probably to
Absolutely.
an extent.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to labels and identity politics a lot of the time. When your viewpoint is essentially that we are the good guys, then automatically everybody else is the bad guy, right? And so how do you come to center with the bad guy?
Yeah.
You don't come to center with a bad guy. You just judge him and render your decision and then move forward with your life. And that's what I think a lot of women, unfortunately, that vote like this and think like this, that get consumed by liberal propaganda constantly. That's constantly calling, conservative fascists.
Yeah.
Or labels like that, anti-vaxxers or what are all the labels, man? There's
You're
like
a toxic man.
Toxic masculinity.
You're toxic.
It's just like you just slam the label and then that's the solution. That's your opinion. That it's rendered law in your viewpoint. And so you cannot come to center in a situation like that.
It's true.
I think it also goes far beyond politics. I mean, you look at the nature of women. There's 4 words that you guys are going to laugh at, but happy wife, happy life. Women like to be right. We like to feel heard. We like to run things the way that we want to run things. And men are sort of taught, and you guys are more tolerant to just accepting that, you may not have full control. You may not have the final say. Whereas women, we like to be right. And so when you take that concept and you put it into politics, and we're talking about, subjects that, again, good versus evil, like women have to be right. Like there's just no room for any leniency on anything else.
Yeah. And we'll definitely dive a little bit deeper about what are the causes between this, the psychological aspect behind it, the divide that is caused due to it. But even just with tolerance, I couldn't help but think, how does this apply today, for example, in the workplace? Because let's be honest, who's more and more in positions of leadership right now? Women, right? Even worse, HR. HR departments are just women. And then it's like, okay, the corporate world, a bit like democracy, can only thrive when people are accustomed to disagreeing on things they don't like without demanding an immediate punishment for it, right? I mean, you run a company, we're all business people here. And ultimately, we're looking for truth, we're looking for the best idea, and we're looking for people to challenge those ideas. So if you hold this like deep-rooted conviction, then anyone who disagrees with you must be punished effectively for it because there's a lack of tolerance. Where does this, and screw politics, where does this lead the private sector? Because it is the heart, the economy is the heart of any country if it doesn't do good. And I know you, Simmer, you harp a lot on the economics of things, and I think you're definitely right about it. But where could this be one of the reasons as well for some form of lag in the economic output, or just the workplace culture in general that we're seeing?
100% in my opinion. You actually raised such a great point. When politics fundamentally should be, in my opinion, essentially a government is like a company. It's an enterprise. It has to be managed effectively. Money has to be spent effectively. It cannot be just spent emotionally. It cannot just be spent recklessly. You're charging taxes to citizens who have to earn that income, and then in Canada we pay like fragments of taxes here and there until to a point where you're essentially more than half or close to half of your income goes towards the government establishment. And when the government establishment, for example, is running massive deficits, causing reckless money printing, which inflates the value of the currency, inflates the
money supply,
essentially,
but
and
devalues the currency.
Exactly.
Yes.
And when that happens, and they're incurring tons of debt, which is causing even more inflation, forcing rates to go up, making housing more unaffordable, forcing people to rent more, and then the rental prices go up, and then it all leads down to homelessness. And so when you don't understand that government has to be managed like an enterprise, and you need to educate yourself on the actual matters of a balanced budget, and when that gets ignored into and replaced by emotional rhetoric, like I don't know, they're anti-vaxxers, or they're just fascist. They're just trying to, they're the conservatives. They're just evil. They're just trying to cut all the government programs. No. They're trying to cut it because, there's a reason why, because we need a balanced budget to have a stable economy. And so when you vote like that, of course, it has an adverse effect on the economy. And on the women's side, when you get swayed by emotional rhetoric, and inflammatory rhetoric, and you get convinced that, hey, the opposite side, they're not just other people with different opinions, they're bad.
Yeah.
Of course, you're gonna vote in a direction where you're gonna vote for corruption, essentially, and festering corruption, rather than paying attention to the logical issue. And so, yeah,
it made me think, and maybe I'm gonna get canceled for saying this, but it reminds me of the fact that there's truly no male equivalent to a Karen. Like, think about it for a second, right? There's no such thing as like a man who just whines and complains and tries to degrade people who don't think like them. But we definitely have a word for that when it comes to women. A Karen. I don't know. Ça, je dis rien. All right, I'm just putting it out there for you guys. But now let's tie this into politics, because to me it seems pretty clear that we've been told for the last 10 years something about radicalization, and it's been nothing but the opposite and an absolute lie. We've been told that men are increasingly radicalized to the right and that this is a bad thing. Well, there was a study done, and we're going to pull it up on TV. That doesn't work. I tried 2 seconds ago, still doesn't work. So looking at the partisan gap between young men and women, over the last 25 years, we used to have a difference of 12 points between where men leaned politically and where women leaned politically. It was fairly close to the mean, to the average, to as good as centrist gets. Well, over the last 25 years, that gap has more than or nearly doubled, and we're standing right now at a 23-point gap. What is actually even more wilder still is the fact that men are actually slightly less conservative than they were 20 years ago. Therefore, it appears that it's women actually who've become radicalized, but to the left, and by a wide margin. So, but what caused it? What changed? And you brought an interesting point earlier, but ultimately, let's dive into it. Let's try to see what caused women to change so much, because something has to happen. This is not just a natural progression, an evolution of social dynamics that it goes without some form of input. So what caused it? What happened?
I think that, there's a lot of things that have happened. I think when you look at social media and what's being posted, there's a lot of moral outrage. And like I said earlier, women tend to gravitate towards wanting to help and nurture vulnerable people and fix vulnerable situations. So when you're living in this like echo chamber of everything that's happening around the world and how much priorities we have to put into and resources we have to put into fixing it, nothing else really matters. We're talking about the same subjects we did 20 years ago in terms of politics. Like, you talk about immigration, that was a thing 20 years ago as well. But the way that we're discussing it today is not the same way we were back then. Like, today, immigration, it's a humanitarian cause. You're looking at, if you don't bring in these people to the country, well, all of a sudden you're a white supremacist and you want children to die in these countries and you don't care and you're selfish and you must bring them over or else. I think that that's one part of it. I think the other aspect I look and I lived through it is university. You go into university, and I joke about it all the time. The best way to make friends in university is to strike up a conversation with someone about left-leaning politics.
No way.
You will be the most popular person.
I had no idea. I thought it was just, Frosh week and then you get hammered. That's my take on university.
That too.
Maybe it's because I did go to university. I walked in, I looked around, I said, screw this place, and I walked right out of JMSB. But I definitely have attended several Frosh parties. So I thought this was a university experience, right? No, that's not it. So people actually do talk about politics.
You have to. I remember during the BLM movement, people were posting block squares on their story. It was like the blackout day. And if you didn't not only if you posted on that day, you weren't allowed to post on that day, but if you did not post a black square on that day, you were ousted. People looked at you and do you not support black people?
So people would actually challenge you for this?
Yes, absolutely.
That was the peak of virtue signaling. Okay, put a black square on your profile and all of a sudden,
the world will be better.
We're solving the crisis. We're solving the issues. And we're seeing it too right now with Ukraine's the same thing. Everyone's flying the flag, right? Oddly enough, I'm not seeing many Iranian flag. I wonder why. But okay, so that's interesting. I had no idea that it was actually this systemic in university.
Absolutely. And it's the people you meet. I mean, they're also coming, everyone goes into university, or you're young and dumb. You don't understand the value of a paycheck.
Yeah.
Half of them are supported by their parents or they've never had to work for anything other than grades.
Yeah.
You're not living in reality. That's one side of it. The other side of it is that you look at the classes that you take, and especially women, we tend to gravitate more towards childcare industries and things like that, where men will go into engineering.
Right.
And so you look at the classes that they take, like gender studies, social justice, things like that, and it's all left.
I can't even believe these classes exist.
You know what it is? It's I call it the politics of compassion. Elliot, there's a graph you shared a few episodes ago about the use of certain words in political discourse, how they've increased. And words like racist, misogynist, homophobic, fascist had increased
all the isms
had increased X-fold. I don't know how many, it increased exponentially or in the last 15 to 20 years. And I think language like that is the main cause of that. I think when like we were saying earlier, when you ignore the logical aspects of a government and politics, you get swayed by emotional rhetoric. And so when the chart that you shared all those weeks ago, that to me it shows why people are being radicalized, is because words like that, they're constantly being bombarded with them, and their minds just begin to warp as a result, and they just think that you're a right-wing extremist just for expressing a view. You ever watch that clip? On a side note, you ever watch that clip? It's so viral on social media, Instagram. It's a woman, she's wearing a mask and a hat, and she's like, did you take the vaccine? He's like, no. He's like, well, you're a right-wing extremist.
Jeez, I haven't seen that, but
he's like, no, I assure you, I'm not a right-wing extremist. And then she asks him another ridiculous left-wing question, and she's like, well, did you do this? He's like, yeah, I did. It's like, well, you're a right-wing extremist.
But and that's a good point, and I agree with you that the rhetoric in media day to day has definitely shifted, and it does feel like there's a war in our minds. But I mean, why does it not affect men as much as women? Because ultimately that's the issue here at stake, right? I mean, men are bombarded by the same amount of, call it, propaganda, and yet it doesn't work as well or as much on us. So that's what I really want to try to dive into right now, is what are the fundamental differences between men and women?
Well, let's go back to tribal society, right? I love to go back to tribal society to analyze it, because fundamentally our instincts have not changed. We still have the same desires, the same impulses, hunger, intimacy, love, survival, growth, all these impulses that humans have wired within them still exist from the same thousands of years ago. And so in a tribal society, men would typically go out to hunt, kill a bear, to bring it back for the tribe, and everyone can eat, right? And women would typically maintain a community. They would hold down the fort and, take care of the children, form bonds with other women in the tribe to, potentially elevate themselves in the tribe, or build a community, so that, when the men come home with the food, well, the assets are dispersed. They're well dispersed. Everyone has their food. Everyone is surviving, and women built that community. And I think that fundamentally is being abused by the government, that like trigger of wanting to build a community, wanting to protect your people. And so, and safety and all that stuff. And women really valued that back then. Why? Because, hey, if you don't have that, well, you're freaking dead in the wilderness.
But do you think this is government, like a conspiracy? The government's actually actively trying to do this?
100%. I think,
Yeah.
I think they go ahead.
You look at Hollywood and the values and culture of Hollywood. I think, especially in North America, it very much influences our day-to-day here. And you look at the foundations of Hollywood, where it comes from, and it was created by the CIA, and the roots of it and the backstory behind it is quite dark, but it was created in order to be able to influence people, and ultimately women, because we have this really deep desire, kind of like you explained, where we want to fit in and we want to follow these clear expectations. And so whatever Hollywood and the media and the world, social media is pushing, it's important for us to follow. It's why you see body trends, 15, 20 years ago, it was trendy to be really, really skinny, borderline, if not anorexic. Then the Kardashians made it really cool to be curvy.
Yeah.
And now we're sort of reverting back to it. But women have this really strong desire to conform. And so if we're told constantly in this world, whether it's reality or not, but I think ultimately it comes from the government in Hollywood, that we need to be X, Y, Z.
And then
we're going to become,
So, I mean, and I kind of highlighted this, right? So I think it starts, yes, with some form of biological hardwiring in men and women here, right? So let's go back to the tribal days. Women evolved in environments where social exclusion carried an enormous survival risk, okay? I mean, you can't hunt when you're pregnant, when you're nurturing, nursing, and whatnot. Survival required the tribe's acceptance, their protection, their sharing of resources, ultimately, like you said, their tolerance for your temporal or temporary vulnerability. Well, millions of years of this, and you get, I guess, a hardwiring in their head where it treats social rejection as the most serious of threats. And I mean, you see this too, and you let me know, Alex, but I've noticed this as early as high school, but this continues throughout life. Sometimes, okay, so this is going to be a little funny joke, but see, men really see women in two categories, okay? So you have the, man, I don't want to say this on YouTube, but you have the sleut. Okay, let's go with that. This is not going to trigger the algo. The sleut, right? Which is like, she does everyone, but I wouldn't mind doing her as well. And then you have the bitch, which is she does everyone but me, right? That's the joke. Guys really see women in two ways, but the one that really attack other women and try to outcast them socially are other women.
Yes.
Women are the ones harping on one another and socially trying to outcast the ones that don't conform to their little group dynamic. You see this all the time. And you're smiling because you're like, I remember
I'm watching 90 Day Fiancé with my girlfriend, and we see it all the time on that. It's so funny.
But yes, right? I mean, it's not to say that men didn't face any pressures themselves. But like you said, we were gone hunting, hunting parties for days, exploration, combat, war. We had to tolerate being alone to a certain extent, being disliked as well to a certain extent, and being outside of like the social group for extended periods of time. Men can handle social rejections temporarily. Now, when it comes to mating, obviously being socially excluded is not good. That's a huge issue. But temporary social rejection was not as much of a threat to men.
It doesn't compromise your survival nearly as much. You can rely more on your strength, on your physical prowess and your talents to survive. And specifically, what I wanted to talk about is there was a research they did to add to your point about social rejection. I don't know about the exact study. Like, I'm just quoting something that I remember I heard a long time ago, and that really kind of stuck with me for a long time. They did a test on children, okay, and they put a bunch of children in a classroom, and there's a red button, and one of the groups is boys, and one of the group is girls, and when you tell the boys, hey, there's a red button in the middle of the table, and the kids are all sitting, and they tell the boys, don't touch the red button, and they tell the same thing to the girls. And there was such a difference in the outcomes that most of the time the boys would push the button, and most of the time the girls would never push the button. And the conclusion of that study, and I'm paraphrasing all of this, I'm just having a conversation, right? The conclusion of the study was essentially that women at a very young age will intrinsically just understand social cues.
Yeah.
They will look at an adult saying, hey, do not touch that button. And they will take that as a social cue. And that whole social rejection element comes in that, hey, I cannot be socially rejected, so I better conform, as like you said.
Yeah.
And so it starts very early.
Yeah. Whereas the boys are more exploratory. They want to say, hey, I just want to find out what happens. I don't care. What's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? And so...
Get caught with the hand in the cookie jar.
Hell yeah. And so, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. And then you also mentioned social media. You've mentioned the online world, right?
Yeah.
So let's call that the algo, somewhat. Well, and that's interesting too, because you kind of look at the graph that I showed earlier, and a lot of the massive spike in left-leaning ideology, or women going more extremely to the left, started happening right around the time that Facebook came onto the scene, iPhones came onto the scene, Instagram came onto the scene. And as such, people start consuming a lot more social media, right? I mean, ultimately, social media is a consensus engine when you really think about it, right? So you can see what everyone believes literally in real time. It's in your face 24/7. Disagreement is visible, measurable, and quite truly punishable at scale. We've seen it with like cancellations, right? The cancel culture. You say something that is outrageous to certain groups of people, and they will try to destroy your life, lose your job, be chastised from society. And again,
women are vindictive.
Very vindictive, yes. The tribe used to be like, because we come from again, tribal hardwiring of like anywhere between like 75 to 150 people was normally a human tribe. And this is modeled with like, for example, if you ask someone to try to imagine a room with 10 people, you can imagine 10 faces. You can even imagine a room with 100 people. But try really to fathom a stadium with 20, 30, 40, 100,000 people. It just becomes kind of like abstract in your head. We were never designed to be in close proximity with so many people, but now we have it shoved in our face all the time. So Facebook obviously launched in 2004, the iPhone came in 2007, Instagram in 2010, and suddenly this kind of stuff is in your face, 24/7. And I mean, it also correlates with the mental health collapse.
Yes. Because there's so much pressure to conform.
Yeah.
If you don't conform, you feel like you're ousted.
Well, that's what you said, right?
Yeah.
So like anorexic, then or very slim. Then after it became more like voluptuous curves.
The Kardashian era.
I remember the slim. What is it? A slim fat? It was called
Slim thick.
Oh,
Slim thick.
Sorry. You see where I stand on this, but anyways, slim thick. Sorry, right? So this kind of stuff now, where you see your vulnerabilities, they're shoved in your face all the time. But another thing too that's true is that everything started becoming more algorithmic driven, right? It used to be, how would you call it? Like chronologically driven. You'd post on Instagram or Facebook, whatever's the most recent would show up at the top of your feed. But now everything is driven by algorithms.
It's a weapon.
Absolutely.
It's a weapon.
And let's call it like what it is. I don't think there's, look, I worked in tech. And to be honest with you, working in tech, I don't think these guys are necessarily like trying to manipulate the minds of people. Ultimately, they're designing an application or a system that captures attention. That's what they want. They want people to stay on the app as long as possible. So algorithms are optimized for engagement. And engagement often comes from emotional response. When you see something that triggers you, especially negative emotional response, you're much more likely to interact with it. And that's even day-to-day life. Say something positive to someone. If I give you a compliment, Alex, you'll be like, that's sweet.
Thank you. I won't remember it in 5 minutes.
Exactly.
You insult me. I'll remember it for the rest of my life.
You're going to grunge over it. You're going to be like, this asshole, and then you're going to try to cancel me, right? So when you consider that women respond more strongly to emotional content on average, right? Men and women, obviously, we respond to negative, but women on average are more emotionally driven. They're also more empathetic. Well, this is when you start realizing that you can be manipulated by these sad, grievous, or tragic stories. And all of a sudden, women are also designed to be nurturing because of kids.
Yes.
So they have this kind of desire, like, oh, you poor little boy, you poor little soul, you poor little, like, the underdog complex. Whoever is the underdog must be supported.
Yes.
Irrespective of the reasons. I mean, I saw this one thing, and man, it's wild. They were talking about these poor refugees coming to the country and if they should be given asylum. And then the guy would say, but he was, convicted of being a PDF in his home country. And it was like completely disregarded. It was just like, he's here, he's poor, he's not doing well. Disregard the incredibly negative impact of this person in order to support him nonetheless. That's the nurturing instinct. You're down on your luck, I'm there for you,
Something else you hear a lot is, people of color, black and brown and indigenous communities are struggling all the time. And,
yes.
Like we have to help them and we have to help support them and we need to give them supports to help elevate them. It's like, well, one thing they forget is that, your life's destiny is in your own hands. We live in a free society. We don't live in a communist authoritarian,
Yet.
But we live in a free society where you have opportunity to excel. You have an abundance of opportunities out there if you look for them and if you hunt for them and if you're thriving and you're what they say is if you got your finger on the pulse, and you're moving with the times, you tend to do well. And if you're not, you get cast aside.
Yeah.
And I actually had a conversation with a family friend of mine, and essentially that person raised these points that, like, we have black and brown and indigenous people. And I was like, look, our parents came to this country with absolutely nothing. We're dogs on the street.
Yeah.
And they found their opportunity. Why? Because they had to be innovative. They had to be creative. They had to excel and push themselves. And eventually they found their way. And I think, and I believe firmly that, these people in these poorer communities, it has to come down from what you do as yourself as an individual. No one's going to come hand you wealth, and so you got to
grab the bull by the horn.
Find the American dream. Pull
fire.
Yourself up by the bootstraps, as they say, and that gets used against us a lot, that we say that to people, but that is actually fundamentally reality. You're not, they say you can bring a horse to the water, you can't force it to drink.
Yeah.
Well, that's what it is with these people. You can tax, the prosperous people and take all that money and redistribute wealth as much as you want. The heroin addict's still going to put it in his arm.
That's such toxic masculinity.
I guess it is, right? And that's where that brings us to
canceling you.
And that brings us to the next point is, radicalized feminism, how feminism has evolved in our culture in the last 50 to 60 years. And what started out as probably something that was beneficial to society. Hey, yeah, women want the right to work. Women want the right to own property. Well, what that was initially has turned into now, sex work is empowering. Messages like this that completely desecrate our society, desecrate our values, our future. And, the result of this is, yes, you get radicalized, and then it creates division between men and women. We're not partnering up as much. We're not having as many kids. We're not focused on family. We're focused on, what I want right now.
Do you think
it all kind of ties together?
Yeah. So do you think radical feminism is to play with the difference now that, we're seeing?
What even is feminism today?
Well, that's a good point, right?
I don't know.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I see, feminist rallies, and they're talking about guns. They're talking about abortions. We're talking about transgender inclusivity.
It used to be about equality.
Yes.
Now they have equality.
They're just causes masked as...
What's next?
Yes.
Well, and this is so I've noticed this, right? When your entire existence and personality or just worldviews is tied to being an activist, once you reach your goal, which they have, first and second wave feminism have reached their stated goal. Well, do you just go home and call it a day? No, your entire identity is tied to being an activist. So you need to keep pushing the fucking goalpost.
You need to find problems.
Oh man, yeah, absolutely.
It's the saying, tough times create strong men, and easy times create weak men. Yeah. I think we've never faced hardship in our life. The hardest thing we had to do is stay home during COVID. Meanwhile, like our ancestors went to war and faced all these really big, scary things in life. And here we are just like staying home, and we can't even do that.
But it's true because the institutions, so that's the thing. Institutions have flipped majoritively women. Universities now, 60% of women in university, 60% of people in university are women.
Yeah.
We are the most educated generation of women.
Yeah, absolutely. But it creates this progressive monoculture of sorts, right? You have an institution with young women that trust the institution because women tend to trust authority figures much more. Again, it's a hard wiring from evolutionary days where you trust the leader.
We're rule followers.
Yeah, there
I
we
said
go.
that at the beginning. It ties in now.
So at least you're honest. You're
I'm
aware.
a huge rule follower.
So there you go, right? Oh, to an extent. I'm sure you break the rules a little bit. You're here talking about
Never.
against the narrative. Oh my God. So now imagine this, right? So you're in an institution, especially at such a young age, when you're still forming your worldviews, you're developing your personality, you're surrounded by like-minded individuals who not only not welcome debate, which used to be university's sole purpose is to bring about challenges, seek the truth, push the boundaries, but now it's actually the opposite. It's only debate is not welcomed, it's debate is vilified. And you've said it too, even in social, close social circles.
You can't even ask a question anymore. If you ask a question,
You're a right-wing extremist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm, oh my God, I didn't even give you my opinion. I just asked a question.
So it's punished. Yeah, disagreement is punished. And then
Yes.
after they graduate university, after 4 years, 5 years of being surrounded by peers who only talk about the same thing, professors who not only talk about it, but sometimes even push their ideologies because most teachers now are also women. And then they graduate, they go into female-dominated fields like HR or education or media or healthcare or freaking charities and non-for-profit. So the monoculture continues. So you have a generation effectively of women that are turning 35, 40 who have never been challenged, never stepped out of their worldviews, and then they go to the ballot box and ultimately they keep voting the exact same way.
There's no other
Vote
option.
with compassion. They vote with compassion.
And this is maybe why it does tie in what you said earlier. I'm is it really pushed by the government? Well, if a specific political party knows this little quirk of evolution, they can cater to it. And this is why maybe for us, we keep hearing all the big words. Carney always does this. He says a word salad of pretty words. Trudeau was the king of this. And then we're but what does it really mean? But to us, it doesn't logically drive anything. But maybe to the opposite sex,
It's triggering.
It's no, but this is either triggering negative, I can't believe these mean people, or it's oh no, but
You feel called out. I gotta join.
I gotta
join. Support the cause.
I see what you're talking about. And you also mentioned similar marriages, right? So there's an economic reality behind this. And I think personally it matters more because I talk all the time about the declining birth rate. And I think that's the most pressing. I mean, Team Elon on this. I think it's the biggest crisis the world is facing right now. But, statistically, single women vote more to the left than married women. Now, obviously, the feminists are going to come out and say it's because the husband is controlling. The husband forces them. I don't think that's what it is. Because across decades of exit polls, we've seen that women who are married keep voting more to the right. And I think it's more, bear with me here, okay? So if women are childless or don't have any husband, they're not married, don't forget, women are more socially driven. So they see society around them as their family by extension. And as such, a government that just taxes you to death, but then redistributes it to the poor people who need it, feels no, I'm nurturing and caring and doing my part. But then when you're married and have kids, society becomes secondary. Your primary focus is your own family. And I think married women see the government now less as a provider of service and more as an authority that taxes and takes away from her family to give to people who don't have families. It becomes almost genetically it's a battle of the genes, right? There's natural selection, there's sexual selection, and subconsciously we want our genes, our progeniture, our kids to thrive and to be the best. So we
Mama
want to
bear
protect.
kicks in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think there's also that economic aspect behind it. So far we got evolutionary, we have social media, algos and whatnot, we have institutions, and now we have a little economic thing.
I have another theory.
Yes.
And I have nothing to support this.
Mm-hmm.
Birth control.
That's
Birth
good.
control, because it plays a lot with your hormones and your attitude and your views. And there is a study, I think it was done in the early 2000s, and they looked at women that were on birth control and the way that they viewed the world, and they studied women that had a significant other. And when they came off birth control, all of a sudden they were no longer attracted to their partner, because what they viewed as really masculine, and how they viewed themselves in their like role of like femininity, it was a weaker version of their true self when they were off birth control. And so I wonder if birth control ties into any of this, where you sort of stepping out of that traditional role and you're not really fulfilling your biological instincts.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but birth control, you got pretty much two types, right? You got the pill, which is progesterone and estrogen, and you have the mini pill, which is progesterone only. Those are female hormones. You're pumping, and at a very young age, I mean, girls are like 12, 13.
They start them so young. I was reading the study, and I think they start like 30% more of high school students are on birth control today than they were like 10, 15 years ago. That's insane.
That is wild, because especially considering, imagine this, right? So there's certain drugs that are well known. You don't give them to people that are under 18 because you have yet to go through puberty and your entire biological development. But we're pumping an entire generation of young girls full of female hormones in the middle of their puberty effectively. Are we playing with their brain development?
I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist, but possibly. I mean, it's also, when you start to add in a hormone, a synthetic hormone into your body, I think your body sort of stops producing it naturally. And so you're messing up like, the human body anatomy, the way that we're built, it's flawless, it's beautiful. And so you're playing with this really intricate system, and we don't know what the results are. And I think it applies to birth control. I think it applies to a lot of the medications we give children, like ADHD medications. Like,
that's a good one too.
Yeah.
Because your body's always trying to maintain what's called homeostasis, right? Which is a balance, a biological balance. So every time you up something in the body, it counteracts it in a certain way. And it's true, like bodybuilders are well known. You take exogenous testosterone, right? So you inject yourself with tea. Well, your little kiwis turn into little grapes. You know what I mean? That's what happens, because your body doesn't need to produce anymore. It shuts down production. Now, obviously, I don't know necessarily when it comes to progesterone and estrogen, but I'm convinced it plays a certain role. And then there's also discussions that a portion of that estrogen or progesterone is not fully metabolized when girls take the pill, and is obviously excreted into the sewer system. And then the water...
We drink it.
Yeah, the water filtration plant is not designed to absorb this. And over time, with millions of women, small but very real chronic levels are accumulated in public water supplies. And then men drink it. And now, not to quote Alex Jones, they're turning the frogs gay. But could it be another reason why we're seeing a drop right now in testosterone in men?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd actually love to talk about the men's side of this conversation, because I mean, we've been talking a lot about women. I'd love to talk about what men have contributed to create this state of affairs.
Sure.
Yeah. On my end, I think that men have, and I'm saying it from very simple terms, I haven't prepared a segment on this, but I think men have really taken a step back in accepting their masculinity and in fully living it and in actually being what quote unquote a real man. We talked about this a few episodes. Real men are builders. We are here to build a society. I feel that as though we've taken a big step back from that. I feel as though that men are not living up to our potential. Let's just say, we're spending more time spent on OnlyFans, on video games, on addictions, and it has weakened our men, and it has created this like the opposite of polarity. It has unpolarized us from each other. It's like a magnet, like the man is masculine, the woman's feminine. Boom! It kind of ideas in my head.
But
are you saying that men and women are the same?
No, I'm saying that they connect. I'm just saying that what men have, in my opinion, have taken a step back on taking initiative, on taking leadership, on building. I mean, But
do you think it's because effectively with seeing women go so far to the left and chastising any man that dares step outside their world structure, men have just kind of just checked out. I mean, I see it all the time on social media as well. Men now are not even dating anymore. They're not going on dates. Generation Z are drinking less, they're partying less, they're socializing less, they're pair bonding less, they're having less sex than every generation prior to them. Is it just because they've checked out? They're like, what's the point of this? Because it's you're attacked at every point. You're told you're the problem with everything in society. And then it's kind of weird, right? Because women's expectation of men in terms of dating is still chivalrous, pay for me, take care of me, lead and everything. But just for dating, in everything else in life, it's
independence.
It's be a subordinate to me. And so men, it's like, okay, we're more than happy to do, like you said, right? Real men have this instinct to protect, to care, to provide. But then we're being told, like, screw you. And
we don't need you.
Yeah. And then we're like, all right, well, we're going to go and drive dopamine elsewhere. Video games, like you said, OF, corn, stuff like that. I'm not talking about Cornhub here. But anyways, so I think it all ties into it. Because since we are two halves of a whole, if one half starts, and I don't want to say it's like the chicken and the egg issue, right? Is it women that's changed first? Is it men that changed first? We could argue. But yeah, the two sides are working against each other instead of working together. And society is worse for it. And we see it with the declining birth rate, right? And I want to tie this back into the Conservative Party of Canada. But effectively, what we're seeing today, at least when it comes to like feminists and male ideology, is that we got 30-year-old women that are unmarried, that are measuring the declining fertility of theirs against their career achievements, because that's all that matters now, it's their career. So there's also kind of like a mental fallacy, right? We all know the sunken cost fallacy. People are more likely to hold on to something they've invested in than to get rid of it, even if getting rid of it was statistically the best choice to make. So I think right now we're seeing a capture where women realize a little bit older in their life that perhaps they've taken the wrong path, but it is considerably more mentally safe for them to just double down and to say, no, this is the right thing, than to admit that they've wasted their childbearing, their fertile years on something that was ultimately unfulfilling and a complete lie. So this, I don't think, is going to change anytime soon whatsoever.
I mean, I don't disagree with you on that.
I don't disagree either.
No. So
it comes down to an individual level. I think if us as individuals start doing the homework, we can turn this around. We can start making babies tomorrow. You know what I mean? We can start getting into families and pair bonding and having a traditional life, which, I mean, I'm realizing the older I get, there's a reason why it worked for like thousands and thousands of years. There's a reason why a man and a woman together have a child and then have multiple children. And then all of a sudden we have this great society that we all live in. We're born into it, but we don't recognize how difficult it was to build it. And the only way it was built was with a family structure.
Absolutely.
As a man, I can take it during my single days. I work equally hard. I'm equally as relentless in business, but because I have to then, as a single guy, take care of my house, do all the back end stuff that, a great wife typically would just do baseline naturally within her instincts. Well, that divides my effort. It divides my abilities. It divides my attention to a point where I cannot output as much as I would have if I had a strong woman backing me. Now that I luckily have a wonderful woman backing me, I'm outputting like 10 times more. I'm way more productive because I can count on my partner to be there for me. And as a result, we both benefit.
Yeah.
We both have this connection. We have this relationship. And, on my end, I believe that men have the main mistake men have made in society is to not control their anger and their rage and their emotional intelligence. And as a result, it alienated women to feminism. And as a result, now we have this dysfunctional society because men on a certain level have not taken the time to work on their anger, work on their ability to be patient and understanding and calm at all times. You got to be a rock. Yeah. You got to be a rock. You got to be able to take the hits. You are the guy. You get all the perks of being a man and having freedom in your hands. But with that freedom comes a responsibility, and you got to take initiative on that. And I think men, if we do that long enough, hard enough, that there will be enough women that kind of wake up and say, hey, there are great guys in the world. We can have a family. We can have what it is we're created here to do.
You know, yes, but as long as a majority of girls are on one side of the spectrum, I'm gonna default back to evolution. Oh man, I love that term. It's my favorite biological or like philosophical term. It's called the sneaky fucker. Ever heard of that term?
No.
Never heard that term, eh? So one of the mating strategies that men kind of pursue is and you see, I mean, to give you an idea, right? A very staunch Trump supporter that pretends to be liberal to bag a girl who's super progressive, right? That's called the sneaky fucker, okay? That's an actual real term in those kinds of studies. And sadly, a lot of men will defer their own beliefs and views if it means increasing their statistical probability of mating, because mating is more important than supporting your own ethos in the hierarchy of needs. And as such, that's probably one of the reasons why, if you look at the graph once again, men are steadily going a little bit more towards the liberal side, is because women went so far liberal that men kind of just, and especially men of weaker stature or more docile, and again, less testosterone with time. I think there's so many variables playing at once, but these men are less likely to hold to their belief and say, nah, this is the way it goes. No, they'll be like, oh, you're so right, honey. And they'll say anything to get it in effectively, right? And I think as long as the majority of women are more and more emboldened to the left, a massive group of normal guys will follow. It's the white knight.
I agree with both of you. I think it takes two to tango. I also look at the circumstances that we're in. It would be virtually impossible for the woman to go back to that traditional life and you know, be a stay-at-home mom and take care and be that nurturing caregiver that the whole family needs. Just economically speaking, it's tough. And so I hate to say it, but men here or men today are pretty beta compared to what they used to be. I mean, we sort of talked about that, but it also makes it really hard for women to step into that role of like femininity and like, you know, take on that role. So it's a two-way street.
Oh, absolutely. But the issue is
but you need both.
But the problem with the men, though, is that because they're rejected for wanting to do the correct thing. And then also the reality, and it's okay, second wave feminism, it's equality in the workplace and whatnot, and that's fair enough. Equality, I'm a big proponent of freedom. Let people make their choices. But the downside now is that you've effectively doubled the supply of workers. So as such, what happens? Supply and demand, you have the value of the worker. So now we're in a situation where very few men, we're talking a fraction of men, can actually support a family with one income.
Yes.
So a household has no choice to survive but to have two breadwinners, a man and a woman, which again is at odds with that plurality, that role division, that traditional nature. You can't. So women are forced into the workplace. And it also emasculates men because then we don't feel needed.
Yeah.
We all need a purpose. Men were purpose driven. The crisis with masculinity is that we're lacking purpose.
Yeah.
But if we can't provide for a family, if we know it, like we maybe, but it's society nowadays. You need two income and you don't necessarily take it personal, but in the back of your mind, you're like, I wish I could give this woman the life she deserves. And I wish she could spend more time with our kids. And you can't, not because you suck. The average guy is not bad. He does everything right. He went to school, he got a job. I mean, to give you an idea, we spoke about that eons ago, but like the average Ford manufacturer worker, line worker in the 1990s, 1914, was earning as much today as what's equal to like $345,000, something like that. Crazy. I mean, that's not the reality of the average man here. The average man makes like 70 grand a year. That's not enough to support a family of four. It's impossible. It's mathematically impossible. Yeah. And I think that's what leads to the massive issue we have.
100%. It comes down to, look, we are the economy. Okay. The economy is not some like omniscient force. You know, we as men are the economy. And if we've had innovation, we've had extremely brutal history. And like humans have had brutal histories and survived through some of the craziest things. And so can we as men, right?
Absolutely.
And so it comes down to taking matters into your own hands and strategizing and learning more and saying, hey, this isn't working, but I'm sure there's something that will work. and concepting and strategizing and learning and learning markets, learning the real estate, learning finance, learning business. You learn all these things, and all of a sudden you can make $100,000. And, you know, a business that's productive and adds value to society becomes profitable. And so if more men can take initiative on that front, then we have more businesses, we have more opportunity. And obviously we need less government. We need to get government out of the way, but that also takes a shift in perspective. And so we need these things to actually move the needle at all if we're going to make it through this as a society. And yeah, that's my...
It's actually interesting what you just said, because basically you're saying men need to go against what we're taught throughout school and you know, the whole pathway of education of, you know, going to school, working hard and getting a degree, and then ending up with student debt and going into whatever field that pays, you know, mediocre compared to what it used to be. Meanwhile, like the study that you quoted before was the whole button, you know, men are much more likely to rebel and find out and take on the risk.
Yes.
And so what's happened where men have become so complacent and don't want to take on that risk anymore.
Yeah. It limits them. It limits the growth of society, and it limits like the opportunity for that man to then create a life where he can have a traditional wife. Because, you know, when it comes to having a traditional partner, well, if you want a traditional wife as a man, you need to be able to cover her survival. Like, she's not going to just be submissive and treat you as her lord if you are not the lord. And you got to figure it out. You, as a man, it is how we have grown. It's how we've survived for eons upon eons, and eons, millennia. Yeah. Eons, like billions of years.
For moons and moons. But let's bring this to Canada, because look, we're Canadians, and we vote conservative, we vote to the right. I know it wasn't always the case for you, Alex.
No,
You were
I was
NDP?
a hardcore liberal. My first time voting, I voted NDP.
Oh, well, it's better than green, I guess. Okay. I guess it's better than green. But you've come a long way.
I have.
Yes.
A very long way. I think I told you this story before, but my first year university, or maybe second year university, there was this like massive climate protest in Ottawa. And I went because that's what you did if you didn't go. It was bad. You got excluded. So I went and I did the typical thing. You take pictures, you make your pretty posters, you post them online, you know, you make sure that everyone knows you're there. You pose with your friend group, you know, you're saving the planet, whatever. We're walking, we're doing this march, and then I get tapped on the shoulder and I turn around and there's this like big news camera in my face. Oof. And it was a big one. It was like CBC or Global News, I don't know, one big one, you know, and it was national, and they were asking me these questions, and I if this interview ever comes and haunts me, I will look so stupid because I couldn't answer anything. I was just programmed like, you got to be left. You got to show up to the climate crisis rally. I'm Canadian. Like, you have to be there. I had no idea about anything. Well, default.
Guys, okay, I want the internet sleuth right now to go digging for this one, okay? And if you work for the media company, look at the archives, please. I'll pay top dollars for this.
I don't know if it ever aired. Probably not. It was so bad. It was so bad.
Well, if we look right now, the voting intentions based on genders, there is a divide again in Canada, although Canada tends to be a little bit liberal, and this confounds all age groups. And we know the boomers are considerably more liberal than Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. But when we separate, let's call it left versus right. So I'm going to put liberals, NDP, and Green together in the left, and I'm going to put Conservative and PPC, People's Party of Canada, to the right. The Bloc I'm not going to count, because the Bloc honestly is hard to really like put right or left. They have policies for both sides. They're just Quebec, whatever is good for Quebec is good for us. So when it comes to women in Canada, 57% of them vote to the left, so more than half, and only 38% of them vote to the right. Compare that to men, where men are 47% to the left and 43% to the right. So again, more liberals than conservatives in Canada, but nonetheless, we see a pretty good discrepancy between the two sides. So then the whole point here now is, how do we rally more women to the right? What's the trick here? Because look, I'm not saying there's going to be an election, a springtime election, but eventually there will be an election. And if the conservatives want to have any hopes of forming a government one day, they need to rely on more than just men. How do we do it? And I don't have the solution, really.
Well, we need to address as a country the issues that women actually prioritize. You know, beyond like the what do we call the far left kind of ethos of like, oh, transphobe, all that stuff. Outside of that, there's also the cost of living.
Yeah.
You know, there's the economy. There's actual realities that are hitting this country to the tune of like never before seen, to be honest. And, you know, we were just talking about, for example, the gas prices going up, right?
Yeah.
Well, when your groceries, you know, Canada's the food inflation capital of the G7, and it's not even close. Like second place is like almost half of what Canada's food inflation is. When you have these imminent disasters about to unfold in this country, I mean, if Canada continues with gas at close to $2, we're going to see inflation spike back up. Same thing's going to happen that happened during the COVID days, right? Inflation spikes up. Bank of Canada says, hey, we got to raise the rates to slow down inflation. Rates go up.
It's a perfect storm then.
It's a perfect storm. It gets worse and worse. And it goes into massive defaults, massive crisis. And at that point, conservatives will need to appeal to women and say, look, we are a country that has thrived for a long time and we can thrive again, but we need to go back to the values that make it right.
But is that going to work and you know damn well what's going to happen? The liberals, Carney or whoever comes after, will come in and say, they're Trump supporters, they're racists, they're bad, they're bigots, vote for us because we care about the little person. They're not going to win on policy with women. It's sad, but it's true.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is a very strong men-leaning point. It's logical, it's rational. That doesn't work.
Well, you have to convey it emotionally. You have to
show it. So what's the trick?
I think a good way to go about what you're talking about, because I do agree with what you're talking about. I think with women, you have to focus on the stability of the household. I think that's really important. So, you know, property, the cost of a house, clothes, food, tax credits if you have children. I think those are all great points. I think it's hard to get through to women because, again, it's like once you start talking, like pulling in the emotions, and especially if the other party is labeling things as evil or a humanitarian crisis, it's really difficult to even get them to be open to the other side. But for me, I look at the Conservative Party in Canada and I look at the Liberals, like Trudeau was cool. You know what I mean? Like, say what you want about him. Maybe you didn't like him. Maybe you did. But he was cool. He was hip. He was with the times. He was fun. He was charismatic. You look at Obama, really charismatic. You know, whether you agree with his policies or not, they were cool. They spoke to the people. You felt charisma. And, you know, I'm not saying that the right doesn't have that. The conservatives do have that. But it's just too polished. Maybe is what I'm getting at. And I think you have to be able to, like, you need to make being conservative cool again. Like, you look at the States and you look at what, like, the trends that are happening there in the movement. I think it's funny because they always sort of paint, like, conservative women as, like, really beautiful and hot. And then they paint, like, the liberal woman, you know, blue hair and weird and whatever.
That is so true, by the way.
You know,
that is so true.
We don't have that here. Like, make conservatism cool again.
but the problem is because in Canada, we're very docile, okay? And we're so scared of stepping on toes. You look at the US, they're so crude and direct. Look at the White House right now. They're pulling like the sickest edits of the war in Iran, like the crazy edits. In Canada, we would never do such a thing. We're all polished, prim and proper. Look at our prime minister. Every word is calculated to the T. Canadians don't like, I mean, that's one of the issues I get, you know, flagged on all the time because I'm very crude and direct, and I'm much more American at heart than I am Canadian. But that doesn't resonate very well with Canadians due to the fact that it's too crass for them. But in America, they're like, hell yeah, pew pew, you know? So I agree with you. Conservative women, okay, first of all, they're all way hotter. Way hotter. I'm sorry. It's just the way, because it's like they take care of themselves, okay? It's I don't know, they care about their outwardly, you know, appearance. Let's go with that. But I don't know, like, imagine if you try to, I don't know. So do you think, okay, you know, I know Polyev, for example, his wife, Anna, she's great. She's an amazing woman. Should she take more of a front and center position?
I think so. I think women need more women in politics. One in politics and that have that, like, feminine energy. I think that's really important. And I feel like we need influencers. Like, we need to just make it cool and okay, and give women another woman to follow, make it trendy. And I think now is a really good time for that, because you look at trends that are happening online. Like, people are ditching vaccines, they're ditching medications, they're ditching public school, they're homeschooling their children. They're looking at like natural remedies instead of going to see a doctor and getting prescriptions. Like, the trend is there. Like, people want to revert back to a more traditional life. And so I just think conservatives need to jump on that, and you need influencer type women, because you're battling the left that has Hollywood, and it's so powerful and it's so embedded in our culture, and everything about Hollywood is so cool. You need something like that on the right.
You know what? I'm going to take a stab at it. Okay? I'm going to take a stab at it, guys. Live. We're doing it live. We have to speak to the women in a language that they'll understand. Okay?
We're getting canceled.
What does that mean?
We have to convey the message in a way that it will be compelling for them to hear it out. Maybe that's the way I should have said it.
Yes.
Let me reframe. So
You're going to get chastised.
I'm going to take a stab at it, okay?
Yeah,
so let's say the average woman makes around $50,000 a year on an average job. We're going to see the amount of taxes she pays for a Yves Saint Laurent bag. All right? Because I thought about it, all right? And when you buy a $2,500 bag, the actual price of the bag that the wholesaler might have sold it to the retailer might have been about $1,100. But you pay a 10% tax to import it. Then you pay a 13% tax when you actually buy it at the store. You pay that 10% tariff, then 13% tax when you pay it at the store. And then you're also paying your personal income tax and the store's income tax. So when it comes down to it, I could create a segment on it on the next episode, a full segment, but roughly 64% of that $2,500 Yves Saint Laurent bag is baked in taxes. And I'm going to do the breakdown in numbers, but when you can convey it in a way that makes sense to them, which makes sense to what things that they want in their life and what they're going for, well, and then you make the logical money argument that, hey, you've worked so hard your entire life to get your amazing job. You've worked so hard, and maybe you make $50K and you want to spend 2.5 on a Yves Saint Laurent bag or a Prada bag that you really, really like. Well, here are the taxes you pay when you buy that bag.
I don't disagree with it. I think it's actually very interesting. It's very interesting and surprising. But it doesn't, that doesn't come to speak to me. I think women are dreamers. We're constantly, you'll see women online, they're constantly shifting everything around the house and redecorating the house, and they want this and they want this. And yes, they want to buy really pretty things, but we're really big dreamers. And I think you have to sell us on this utopian life and lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think that's, well, not lie, but it's just, and I think if we're looking at someone that did this really well in a campaign and that pulled in a lot of female voters, Trump. And you could disagree with him, you could agree with his politics, but I think he did a really good job at pulling in women, because he sold this narrative that we're going to have the best education in the world. He didn't get into the details of how and why, but it started off with, we're going to be the most educated and the best educated country in the world. And we're going to be the safest country in the world. And we're going to get rid of this. And we're going to get rid of this. And you sort of created this utopian life and country that women want and desire.
It's imaging.
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm on the same with you when it comes to that, because the reality is, again, it sucks to say, but going again with the number, the raw number, may I remind you of women math? You know what I mean? It's like we're talking to people who will see something that's 25% on clearance and say, I saved 25. I made 25.
I do that every day.
Well, you heard it. You heard it right here live.
And
guys.
I consider myself pretty smart, but
there
I do that every day.
So women math is a real thing. Now, as for projecting a good look, okay. I still think that won't be good enough. And I know I'm like a Debbie Downer right now, but it's because I think of Caroline Leavitt, is that her name?
Yes, yeah.
The press secretary in the U.S. Levitt. Yes. Thank you. And I mean, you cannot have a woman that's more accomplished, more polished, well-presented, well-spoken.
At a young age, too.
She's 28 years old. And yet, the left attacks her. They attack her on her looks. They attack her on her, spouse choices. She gets completely destroyed, but not by men. Again, it's not
It's
men.
always women.
It's always women attacking her because she effectively represents everything they're not. There's probably a
Jealousy.
internalized, for sure.
Competitive.
There has to be, and that's the thing, women are hyper competitive as well in the dating marketplace. And she's there, you know, bags herself a billionaire and has a job in the White House, and she's 28. Meanwhile, you know, these little cuckoo locos with the blue hair, you know, they're going on 55 and they still have 4 cats to go, you know? So I don't know. Look, I think this is going to be ultimately the most important thing that the conservatives can do in the coming years is finding a way to sell and rally the right, the conservative, to women, because without them, it is impossible to form government in Canada. The deck is stacked, the game is rigged, and as such, we don't have the answer today. We tried, but I think there's going to be a lot of thinking to do around this.
They are the largest voting population
Yes.
block in Canada, so it's a big question.
I have an idea.
Uh-huh.
You know, youth unemployment in Canada is at an unprecedented level, right? Like our children are struggling. You know, a quarter of university students are skipping meals to afford the cost of living.
Yes.
And women are a nurturing presence in our lives, right? We all have that. Hopefully, we all hope or know somebody that has this, the amazing grandmother, the amazing mother who's always there, super mom. And, you know, her children are facing the highest rates of unemployment in the history of Canada. Her children are struggling to afford meals going to university, you know, and the Liberal Party has, in my opinion, abandoned our children. The NDP has abandoned our children because these facts are not heard in our media these days. These messages are not heard because, well, when people hear them, it's going to make their hairs go up, and you know, mainstream media will never share that message. But it's our job to put that message out there, and you know, let people vote the way they vote.
Well, we're not going to solve that issue today. But on that note, thank you so much, Alex, for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. Am I your first guest?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, well, with the relaunch of the show, you're the official first guest.
Cool.
And who knows, maybe more to come. Everyone, obviously, we do have a Patreon, $8 a month. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. What's your take on this? First, how do we solve the entire bringing and rallying women to the conservative side? And also, why do you think that women are shifting considerably more to the left? Comment down below. We read every single one of the comments and we reply to all of the comments. But once again, thank you so much and tune in next week.